All right, good evening. It's nice to meet you. My name is Student X, and I want to thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to conduct this interview. Now, the prompt I've been presented with is representing quite a interesting and highly emotional situation, where it states that a YouTube video of a group of junior high boys has risen to the surface, which has evidence of them abusing someone who is working on the school bus. It says that these students were suspended from school and given 50 hours of community service, and then asks whether I think this punishment is just and whether something else could be done differently in the situation in regards to their punishment or perhaps something else in the environment. Now, before I delve a bit deeper into my answer for this, I want to quickly outline the items that I'll be covering today. So, I want to begin by first just discussing the emotionally charged nature of a situation such as this one, then talk about some of the reasons that may have let this situation occur and also escalate to a point that caused this to happen before it was stopped, and then talk about how it relates to possibly the punishment in general and how that can be implemented to create learning and changes for a safer and more inclusive environment for all the people involved. So let's circle back to the start. I want to begin by stating what I at least think is the obvious here, and that a situation like this should never have been really allowed to happen in the first place. Anybody who shows up to their place of work, their place of worship, their place of education deserves to feel safe and able to go to that area without threat of any types of persecution such as this one, whether that abuse is verbal, mental, and or physical. And I think that's one major overarching theme that really needs to be brought home when discussing questions such as this one. Now, to call in a personal experience with this too, a similar situation unfortunately happened at my high school a lot of years back, and this is really calling deep into a memory. But we had a incident where a group of children were picking on, unfortunately, someone with Down syndrome in this same sort of way. And I think what I'll circle back to is that the lessons that the school board and the student body were able to bring out of that could really inform the way that this situation could, be transformed as much as it possibly could from something that is inherently negative, such as this, into a better learning experience to create more inclusive environments. So, with that in mind, let's circle into sort of examining what might have caused this situation to happen in the first place, and then move towards lessons and then the punishments. So, I want to ask, what prompted this attack from the student environment, and what parts of the school's culture or the disciplinary bodies or perceived rules allowed this to happen in the first place? I would want to really examine what the boys in this video were really thinking, like what created the justification to allow this action? Is it something that they were learning from within their friend group? Was this being displayed by other teachers at school? Was this being displayed at home? And perhaps does the school culture allow for bullying to go unnoticed and without either A, punishment for behaviors that put other people in danger, or B, allow things to just simply go unnoticed and under the radar? And then that implicitly creates the idea that, hey, bullying of this sort is, not even just allowed, but also tolerated and even accepted by some of the people. And that's something that we really need to examine as well. And moving into that leads me to question whether the punishment was right and justified. In this case, I absolutely believe that a punishment, should be doled out because these kids definitely need to learn the lesson that actions such as these cannot and should not be tolerated. But I'm wondering what could be a bit more of a transformative item to add to this rather than just placing community service and not having the victim press charges. And that's where I'm going to call back to my personal experience. When this sort of situation arose in high school, in my time in high school, I should say, and like I summarized, that a group of boys took it upon themselves to bully a person with Down syndrome, they, of course, were punished by the appropriate bodies, both in school and from our local police department, who ended up getting involved but not pressing criminal charges. But the key that I really found to resonate with me for a situation like that was the education and humanization of the victims and learning about other people in their community. And I think that's a really core pillar of what this question stem is missing. When this happened, the entire school was actually called for an assembly by the principal, the vice principal, and lots of the teachers who were involved both in early childhood education and the special education sector. And we had a couple of guest speakers come in from diverse backgrounds, also who were excuse me, were also disabled either intellectually or physically. And they had an absolutely informative and really emotional lecture just that displayed to the students the real harms that come from things like this, and that it's easy to just fall into these, I guess, modes of not showing that empathy and understanding to other people that may seem or look or feel different from us, and really calling upon that compassion and having someone come to us and say, hey, like this is really the effect that this ignorance truthfully can have on people of any sort of variety, and it's not right, and these are the outcomes it has. Like that disabled child had to leave our school because they didn't feel safe, and they shared stories of other people who were driven to depression or self-harm because of that. And I think that really led to a people opening their eyes at our school, but b leading to that cultural shift and learning in our school environment to just create a better space for everybody, regardless of ability or orientation or what have you, or any descriptor that people can try and differentiate themselves by. And I think that's really crucial. So with that, do you have any follow-up questions for me about what I think about a situation like this and how it relates to my experiences?
Yes. So would you answer what do you think is an appropriate punishment?
Okay, well, excellent question. So I think calling back to that, I think the school suspension and the 50 hours of community service is partially appropriate, but I think also adding that element of re-education is really, really crucial. And the way that I would go about implementing that is likely getting them to either enroll in a class that is in the school or a class that's out of school to learn about people from all different types of backgrounds and abilities. And then also, likely as part of that community service, perhaps we can have 50 standard hours or something like community cleanup, but maybe we could add 50 more hours where they need to volunteer in, say, a halfway house for somebody who has addictions, maybe in someone who is in long term care for someone who has either a physical or intellectual disability. But the key is also have them be well supervised during those times so that they, A, don't, repropagate these behaviors towards other people in this way, but B, have a role model and a mentor to really learn from so they can have these transformative changes and perspectives to really make that paradigm shift from someone who is taking on these types of actions to someone who is making the world a better place through the way that they show up and care for people. So with these last 10 seconds, I want to thank you very much for the presented prompt and follow-up, and thank you very much for interviewing me today. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the cycle.
Thank you. You too.
Well, good morning. My name is Example Student, and I want to thank you, excuse me, for taking time out of your likely very busy day to conduct this interview. Now, the situation I've been presented with here is quite interesting, and it states that I've been taking care of my friend's cat Muffin for about a week while my friend's on vacation. But the day before my friend is set to return, I'm unable to find Muffin. And what am I going to do to make sure that I can find them? So, to begin, just before I delve a bit deeper into the answer, I want to quickly summarize just my personal experience with having a cat in general and how that's been meaningful to me. B, delve into the methods I would actually take to find my friend's cat, and then C, what I would do if I was able to, luckily and hopefully, find the cat, and what I would also do if I was unable to, and then how these problem solving skills will relate to my future practice as a physician. So, moving back to the start. Now, this is a situation in which I've found myself similarly, except that the cat was my own and not a friend's on vacation. So, obviously, that adds another layer of stress because I have an obligation both to the cat to find them, but also to my friend who is entrusting me with the task of taking care of their beloved animal. And from my ownership of a cat who's named Shuby, and I love him very much, they are very, very elusive. So there's many ways that they can really seem to just get away from us and hide in corners or outside or in a bush or what have you. So I think that's really something to take into importance as well. And especially if I were this friend, I can't possibly imagine how emotionally heavy and stressful it would be if I came back from my nice vacation. I'm feeling calm and well rested, and my really beloved pet, who I likely care about very deeply and is a source of emotional support for me, is just up and vanished. So it would really, really be important for me to make sure I find that cat. So because of that importance, let's move into the next step here and talk about what tactics I would really take. One thing that I have found to work for my cat is simply finding their favorite food can or treat and either shaking the bag or banging on the bowl with a fork. Normally doing that for about 5 minutes, that often makes him come running because he thinks it's mealtime. So that would be the first step that I really take is just see if that works. And if it does, that's excellent. But if it doesn't, then I would really just go searching through the house or outside if the cat's also an outdoor cat and look for all the common hiding places. I'm going to go to the dresser drawer. I'm going to go to the closet. I'm going to look on top of the washing machine, maybe in the bush outside, underneath the car sometimes if it's in the driveway. Just really explore all of those options in a comprehensive way to make sure I don't leave any stone unturned and really hope for the best in that case. And also, there's another way that I could go about it too, is like asking my friend if there's any common hiding places that the cat might be in, but I have to tread carefully with that as I don't want to distress my friend while they're on the trip. And then that creates another layer of emotional burden and possible distrust for me in the future, which we don't want. So that needs to be handled carefully. Now, moving into the sort of courses of action if I was able to find the cat or not. If I was able to find the cat in one of these hiding places or just through the food method, I would be really overjoyed. Now, the absolute best outcome that I could possibly hope for, especially assuming the cat was unharmed in any way, just from either being outside or being in hiding for too long. But if I wasn't able to find the cat, then I would need to take a bit of a more nuanced approach. This would really call my emotional capacity, empathy, and compassion into play. So once this person came home, I would have to figure out a way to break the bad news to them in the best way that I possibly could. And the way that I would really go about that is choosing my situation wisely. If they just walked through the door, I wouldn't just say, "Hey, your cat's gone," because that is going to really just set off a very, very poor emotional chain reaction that I don't want to do to my friend, and it also undermines trust in me. So what I would do is wait for a time that is a bit more opportune and then say, "Hey, like friend, I know that you've entrusted me as someone that you know very well to take care of your beloved pet, but this happened while you were away, and I was unfortunately unable to find Muffin in this case. And I recognize fully the responsibility that I have to take on in this situation. And I have some options that I can give to you for some support, but also want to know how I can support you too. So, with that in mind, I would also bring in possibly if this is very emotionally charged, which it very much likely is to be, excuse me, some resources that could help. I know that here where I'm located, there's a service called 211, which is essentially an online directory full of various options for people who need different supports when it comes to all types of facets of items. And what I would really do is help them navigate 211 with me and talk about veterinary therapy resources for mental health services about the loss of a pet. And then really offer to be on that journey with them to show that despite the fact that I wasn't able to come through in that situation, that I'm still really there for them as a friend who cares, both about obviously the animal and be about them too. Because that is a really, really crucial facet of what to me, friendship and relationships are is taking that radical ownership and being there for people even when unfortunately you've made a mistake. So in both of those cases, those are the courses of action that I would take. And I think that decision tree actually relates a lot to my future practice as a physician, as I'm going to be in situations a lot where I need to A, develop novel solutions to find the answer to problems, but B, also handle emotions that are, really hard to process sometimes, and also situations that can be deeply saddening or frustrating or even frankly scary, whether that be navigating the death of a relative or a loved one or a new diagnosis of a really life-changing illness. So with that in mind, do you have any further questions about how I would go about, finding this cat and then the options I would take if I did or didn't, and then how that relates to my future practice?
Yes, thank you very much. Let's say your friend is asking for financial compensation for the damage that you have made to him and to his cat. And let's say, what would you say is a fair amount of money that you'd be willing to pay?
Well, that's an excellent question to bring up. I think directly locking on a fair price for compensation is going to be a challenge, but I would think that I would call upon my knowledge of friends who actually work in critical damage insurance and pet insurance to really try and find a price that would be, amendable to all parties in this case. I think it really also essentially encapsulates the emotional struggle in which has been brought forward because of a situation like this. But also, we could look and see if there's a policy that's already in place for something of the sort. So, if there are, we could likely combine those two together to find a fair price that works for everybody. And that I think is really the crux of that is just focusing on fairness and also for existing resources that we already have in place. So, with these last few seconds, I want to thank you very much for listening and have a wonderful rest of your interview cycle. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Good morning. It's very nice to meet you. My name is Example Student. I use he, him pronouns, and I want to thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to conduct this interview. Now, the prompt I've been presented with here is quite an interesting one personally, and it's asking what commitment means to me. And before I delve deeper into that, I want to quickly outline, by starting with A, my definition of commitment, B, tell a quick story that really defined in my personal life what commitment both felt like and looked like to me, what I learned from that personal story, another story where I was really able to integrate those lessons into my life, and then D, how that relates to my future practice as a physician. So, circling back to the start here, let's talk about what commitment really means to me. And in my experience, I found that commitment is a devotion to either a cause or a person, even when that seems hard and or impossible. And I want to delve a bit deeper into that, into how that was expressed and where I found that from. So to do that, let's take a little journey back in time to my second year of university. And this was the really the nexus where I knew and decided that I wanted to choose medicine as a career path. And I'll get into why. During this time, I had just come back from Montreal, where I spent some time as a musician during my first summer after completing year one of university, and was really looking to find what I felt was my purpose in this world. And I found that really came through experiences I had in second year, and a combination of those things. To begin, I was taking an overloaded class amount in the first semester, and it included no elective. So it was only the hardest of the classes that I had to take for that second year for my neuroscience degree, which is what I took for undergrad. Now, at that time as well, my mom was very unfortunately suffering from a newly diagnosed chronic illness where she had essentially nerve pain in the spine. And that unfortunately left her bedbound for almost that entire time of my first term of undergraduate neuroscience in university. And needless to say, that time with the overloaded courses and also having, one of my biggest rocks and support system really kind of be suffering in such a visceral way that I was, witnessing every day. It was very tough, and to say the least. But I was able to get through it by really integrating some lessons and also in these lessons that by integrating some lessons that I really took from that situation. And those two lessons were the importance of a positive mental attitude and also regulating your own nervous system. When things really seemed to feel like they were impossible and just so difficult every day, I really thought that I was kind of at the end of a bit of a rope there. I was like, oh, what can I do with school? Like, is this for me? Am I cut out for the struggle? And I really felt in my heart that yes, but I needed to bring myself down to feel calm and strong in my own presence. And to do that, I adopted a yoga practice. I took, maybe 10 minutes each morning and just gave myself the space to calm my nervous system down and know that I could tackle the day. And that really led into me having the space to develop a positive mental attitude where with that new space, I could really see into the future and I could say that, things are going to be all right, especially if I just keep pushing forward, both for me and my mom too. And reaching the end of that term, I really found that I made that breakthrough into a much better headspace and realized that I could do whatever I set my mind to. And to see my mom really in that state and know that there's a profession out there that can facilitate that healing for her and who's helped to facilitate that healing, I knew that I could challenge and channel my energies into becoming that and expressing that. And that really moves us into my third year where I hit another large challenge, which was that of the MCAT and also learning to be a ski EMT at the same time. That the amount of hours I had to devote to those two things to achieve success well surpassed the amount of hours I was devoting to my early term where I had overloaded classes. And I sometimes even found myself at the top of this mountain in the tool shed, which luckily there was a cell phone tower next to it, but I was doing UWorld biochem passages in the tool shed on shift to try and ensure that I would be able to learn the skills I needed to be an effective caregiver to those people who found themselves in danger in the wilderness which we operated in, but also to be a competent pre-med student who can show those knowledgeable competencies to become the physician that I aspire to be. And really being able to channel those methods of yoga and calming down, and also having that resilience of knowing what I've been through before, really allowed me to make the most of that situation and channel that to become a both a stronger person mentally and physically. And I think that relates very much to my future practice as a physician. I'm going to be faced with times where there's going to be difficult situations to face, long hours, especially during residency, probably missed holidays and missed family events. And that really is going to show what commitment means once again, because I'll be able to call upon all of these really sacrifices and lessons that I've had in my past and then bring them forward like I did in the ski patrol realm and ensure that I show up competent and confidently enough to be the physician that I aspire to be for the well-being of my patients. And I think that's something absolutely crucial that I want to call upon. And because of that, I do think that commitment to medicine and the people in which you serve is a really, really core tenet of what it means to be a good doctor. And with that in mind, do you have any further questions about what commitment means to me and how it relates to my life?
How will you be able to handle the stress of medical school?
That's an excellent question. And to handle the stress of medical school as I progress through it, I'm going to once again call upon the skills and practices that I've cultivated through undergrad and my time as a wilderness EMT and ski patroller. And I think, especially before classes and big exams, that key is going to be regulating my nervous system to make sure that I, again, show up in a calm, confident, and competent way. And the way I'm going to express that is no matter where I am, and this is something I do now, I could be in the hallway of the medical school before the exam, I could be outside a room for an OSCE, I could be outside of the OR right before I do one of my first cases in third year. It doesn't really matter where, but I can ensure that I really take that space to, like I said and summarized before, take that pause and take those, possibly 10 deep breaths. I probably won't have 10 minutes, but I can even take 30 seconds to 1 minute just to come back down to center and know that with the experiences I've had and the competencies that I'm expressing, I'm ready for this. And that's how I believe, at least I think, I'm going to make it through medical school, is calling upon all the skills I've developed, the passion I have for the field, and also the ability to self-regulate. And in these last 30 seconds, I really hope that was able to answer your question in a fulfilling way. And I want to thank you very much for taking the time to listen to my response and interview today. So thank you very much for your time, and I much appreciate it.
Thank you. You're doing great. By the way, can we skip question 4 and jump to question 5? And you
Sure.
can do 4 questions just for so we can give you feedback.
Yep. All right, my 2 minutes for investigation starts now for that. Good morning. It's very nice to meet you. My name is Example Student. I use he, him pronouns, and I want to thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy day to conduct this interview. Now, the prompt that I've been presented with here is a quite an interesting one, and it's asking how that I could best be an ally to the Indigenous community. And to really delve into that answer, I want to quickly outline a framework of the way that I would approach approach a prompt, excuse me, such as this one. And first, I'd like to go over a bit of history of the indigenous populations that we have here in Canada, and then how that relates to a personal experience that I was very privileged to have, and then how both that history and personal experience can inform the way that I interact with indigenous populations and inform my allyship here in the present and in the future as a medical student and physician. So let's circle back to the start. I want to begin by quickly acknowledging and exploring the history of indigenous peoples in the lands that we inhabit. Now, it goes without saying that that history is extremely storied and is full of instances that have created intergenerational trauma, oppression, and various institutions that have really worked to strip the identity of indigenous peoples away from them. And the existence of the Truth and Reconciliation Foundation and funds are really call upon evidence of that. And if we look back through history, we can see the outcomes of residential schools and outcomes from the 60s scoop and even sooner into our present, the millennial scoop as well, that has required indigenous peoples and the, I guess, westernized governments of our country to come together and create things like the Truth and Reconciliation Council and the 94 calls to action to acknowledge the unfair and storied histories that indigenous peoples have gone through, but b, to actually make meaningful changes in the realm of indigenous communities and healthcare. And I think that especially relates to calls to action 20 to 24, which go beyond just the recognition of the fact that there's been indigenous inequality in the communities and healthcare, but really say that we need to do something about it. And that creates the allyship that I want to explore a little bit further here. And to explore that allyship, there was a really threshold moment that I've had that kicked off the ideation and beliefs of the ways that I can become an ally, and also really furthered some research into that. And that moment happened during my time at Nova Scotia Music Week, where I was playing drums for a local band. And I'm also lucky to be able to call myself a drummer. I've been playing for about a decade, and I'm still really involved with the music scene here in the place where I'm living, and it's quite rich and vibrant. And as I'll hopefully display, contains a very rich population and experiences. So what I actually encountered is a seventh generation Cree Poundmaker chief was holding a bowl meditation, and I was able to attend, and I went through the meditation, and it was absolutely wonderful. But after the meditation was over, we had a really generative conversation, and I just simply asked straight up that me as a Caucasian provider who's going into the medical system, how can I best honor the indigenous experience that has taken place in our healthcare system? And obviously, I can't transform myself into an indigenous person, but the thing that they said really struck me, and it's that lived experience in many indigenous cultures is one of the highest forms of evidence. And I can't just magically make that happen for myself by getting their lived experience. But what I can do is show up really present in any interaction I have and just see people in their stories and believe them and hear their pain, hear their suffering, and hear their hopes for the future and hear their stories in a way that truly shows that I care and empathetic, compassionate, and just listening. And I think that's one of the big cornerstones of how we as health providers can be allies to the Indigenous community. And that first pillar is just to stop and really listen and just be present with people who come to us and show them, yet yes, we do care and we're here and ready to make changes. Now, that moves great into the second pillar, which is what changes can we really make and how can we support and facilitate them? Now, a great way that the province in which I'm inhabiting has gone about making these changes is actually the introduction of Indigenous health collaborators. And essentially, what this entails is having people hired from local Indigenous communities who still speak the original language, and they come into healthcare settings and act as a direct linguistic and cultural translator for people who are acting as providers that aren't of the Indigenous culture. And this promotes really an atmosphere of safety and communication for both the indigenous person and the provider, and allows for that middle ground to really be struck and create more beautiful relationships because of that. And with those relationships comes the ability to implement more systemic changes in practice. And I think another thing that we can call upon is rural access to, providers in general in communities that may be part of a reservation or maybe more rural in nature. And having those connections and conversations really would allow us to facilitate the building and funding of those centers as well. And last but not least here, I think another key is that at the medical school that I'm planning to attend, there's also a pathway for Indigenous students. And as someone who is really going to be hopefully boots on the ground in that sort of scenario, I can offer as much personal and also um, I guess institutional support to anybody who's coming through that pathway and might have any questions about things related to the curriculum, if they're still applying, or just really try and make an open line of communication for anybody who has questions and is coming through those routes as well. So to quickly summarize, I really think the crux of allyship and advocacy stems from our ability to really just stop and connect with all people, especially of Indigenous background, really work on some of the cultural access points that are being implemented, but then take a step further to allow for systemic change, both to allow Indigenous communities to get access to healthcare, but also help facilitate the creation of more Indigenous practitioners as well to ensure that we can have a more culturally diverse and whole system in general. So with that in mind, excuse me, do you have any further questions on how I see allyship towards the Indigenous community?
If you were to become a doctor, how would you help your indigenous patients?
That's an excellent question. And I think that's a very multifaceted approach that I would need to take because it's not going to be a one size fits all approach for any Indigenous patient that comes to my office. There's a variety of things that they could be struggling with, and that could be anything from mental health due to a situation either related or unrelated to the intergenerational traumas that come from their treatment, or it could be someone suffering from unregulated hyper or hypotension because they don't have clinical access to resources either on their reservation or from the community they're from. Or it could be just a standard doctor's appointment. There's so many options underneath the really underneath that sphere of how people might need to be helped. But again, I think it really calls back to that idea of being seen and listening to the perspectives and stories that these people are bringing to me as a doctor, and just staying present and exploring those to really create healing and the best possible outcome for them. So, with these last 5 seconds, thank you very much for listening and have an excellent rest of your day. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, good job. Good job. I think this went very well for you. So that's
Cool.
great. Um, you will definitely ace it
I hope
soon.
so. I could have done
Yeah.
a bit better considering I just died like, half an hour ago, but
No, it's okay. No, good job. Good job. It was actually
thanks.
a very well done. So because we have very limited time, let's jump into feedback right away. So we will start each question. The person responsible for the question will give the feedback first, and then everyone else will chip in, but we have to be quick. Okay. All right.
Okay, I will do the first question.
Yes, please.
Okay, so for this one, I think you did really, really well. There are some comments that I wanted to make, so I'll give positive comments and then negative comments after. Positive comments, I really like that you introduce yourself. Always do that. Second one is I like that you worded the question. And I remember one of my mentors told me to do this always because sometimes you misunderstand the question, and at least that gives the person, like the panel person, a way to correct you. You also gave me a structure to follow. So you broke it down into this is an emotionally charged situation, perspective, et cetera, et cetera. Always do that. That's absolutely excellent. And then you delved into it. Before you actually went into your points, you said things as circle back to the start. And I really, really enjoyed that because that showed me that, okay, we're done with discussing the original structure. And now I'm going to actually discuss my points. Now I'm gonna move on to negatives plus a mix of both. So the first one that you said, again, circle back to the start. I'm just reading off of my notes. You said emotionally charged, which I like because that is what the situation we have at hand. You discuss perspectives, which is what you want to do in this type of STEM for a question, for this type of question. And then you discussed Karen's perspective, which is workplace is supposed to be safe. And then students, you said, well, is it the school culture? Is it something at home they're modeling, or the school doesn't have rules or absence of rules, or what type of culture does the school have? I really enjoyed those. The next ones that I do want to mention is, so you did a really good job in the beginning. Afterwards, what I would recommend is before you jump onto your next point, actually state, I'm moving on to the next point that I mentioned, and you can actually state out loud the first one. So the first one you had was emotionally charged perspectives. The second one was escalations, I think. Yeah, escalation. So you can actually mention that out loud. That way I can go back and focus with you if I did lose my trail of thoughts. And same thing for the last one. The one thing that I would like you to do is, first of all, actually mention what type of transformative changes that you would do. You did say a core pillar that is missing, and then you explained it a bit. And then Abed actually was able to catch you up with that on your follow-up question. So say, mention what type of changes you would like implemented. I like that you use your personal example. So what I would have done is use my personal example. This is what happened. This is what I learned, and this is what I would apply. And the last thing is always mention a summary if you have time, like a liner or two. And one thing, I'm being really picky here, but instead of saying disabled child, use words like children with disabilities or different able-bodied children's. And this is also a feedback that I got before.
Yeah.
So I'm giving you that too. But overall, I think you did really, really well. Even on your follow-up question, I like how you broke it into, yes, still, it's not acceptable to have abuse, but this is what I would implement in terms of education. Did really good.
Perfect. That's really valuable. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll open it to Sakashi and Fatma.
Yeah, good job, Brayden. You had yeah, it was very well done. If you wanted to elevate this response a little bit, I'm just going to give you a few points you can add. I think for some problem, think about a solution to end your prompt, right? So the solutions I was thinking about for this problem would be maybe having guided workshops on bullying, maybe getting the students to write some reflective essays, maybe doing some training workshops on what the right behavior would be some concrete solutions that you can add to enhance your response.
100%. Thank you.
Brayden. First of all, I'll just say, like, obviously you're a high caliber applicant, so some of this feedback's going to be nitpicky, and I'm going to try not to repeat some of the stuff that my peers have already said. But a lot of those, like, I also follow the same structure, like being positive and then room to improve. So I'm not going to repeat a lot of the same ones that were already mentioned, but there were some that were mentioned. So I really appreciate that you came out and directly condemned the inappropriate behavior. That's really good, and keep doing that. I appreciate that you were talking about, like, how can we reframe this as a learning opportunity? That was really great. This is really important. I think you did it really well in this question, but I think it was a little bit missing in the following ones. You spent some time finding information. So, like, I would, like, what's going on in the kid's house, and like that information finding. Why are they doing this? Is it enabled in the school environment, home environment, whatever it is? Those kinds of questions is really great, and you did that really well in this question. Specifically, I really like how you talked about how from your example, that this, the way your school handled it, they talked about education and humanization of the victim. Always, like, the word humanization is a great word to use whenever it's appropriate, so that's a great job. And then you, importantly, you talked about, this was like, I was like really scared you weren't going to mention this, and then you did. So you were talking about when you were advancing the community care, like, bringing that transformative change. You talked about, like, how you would integrate these students into the kind of communities that they might have had some biases against. And then importantly, you mentioned that it would be in a supervised area, like in a manner, so they don't actually further propagate it. That was really important. So good job mentioning that, because that could have been like a
Yeah.
something they could have dinged you on. And then just room to improve. Like, again, I really appreciate you setting it up and giving me that summary and all that. That's really great. I think you can tighten it up a little bit. You usually spend a lot of time summarizing the prompt. In fact, the first time you did it before you got on well, you spent a really long time. The second time you did quite well. You tightened it up, so that was good. And then, so this is really nitpicky. So when you said, because the question did ask if you agree with the punishment, so good job coming out and answering that, because you actually do have to answer that. But when you are saying you agree with it, don't use the negative word punishment. So it's fine to use punishment elsewise because you're using the word in the prompt. But when you said, I would agree with the punishment, I would rather say I would agree with this disciplinary action. So just don't associate a negative thing with yourself. It's subconscious. And then, so you rely quite heavily on your past experience, which is really good and can work in your benefit. The only thing I would caution you against, and this was something I was cautioned against too. Sometimes when that past experience doesn't fit so perfectly, you need to come out and state like this is different, and you did that in the cat example, for example. But one thing I would have wanted you to mention here is, for example, when your school, calls a whole assembly and the student was bullied, how sometimes the student doesn't want that. That brings even more attention to them. So just mentioning that, like, I wasn't involved in that situation, but in a case where I would be involved, I would consider how the student would feel, perhaps having attention in this manner isn't how they want, right? Just like a little quick note. And then you did talk about stakeholders, and including Karen, but just like you did that information finding with the boys, I would have liked you to have done that with Karen. Like, how is she feeling? Does she have supports and that kind of stuff? Just a little bit. And then there was a comment made about referring to individuals with disabilities as individuals with disabilities. Yes and no. So disability lecturers and professors will tell you do not use person first language, because person first language assumes that disability is inherently a negative thing. So people with disability mostly, and including disability lecturers and individuals who are disabled, will say call us disabled people, because just like it's not bad to be a Black person, it's not bad to be a disabled person. So, but that being said, admissions committees are not up to date. So for admissions committees, use differently abled or all those person first languages, but just know that the actual disability community generally appreciates that you say disabled person.
Cool.
Okay,
That's
so
very informative. Go ahead, Ed.
yes,
Sorry.
just no worries at all. Just for the sake of time, I'm just gonna spend 20 seconds just say, and this is feedback in general, right? You are very good at marketing yourself. This is what makes you stand out. You find ways to speak in a way that shows yourself. For example, the statement you started with before going into your structure about this is not acceptable, it showed your values, which is a great way to market yourself. And then you shared the personal experience, another way to market yourself. You were also good in painting an image to the interviewer, right? When you talked about how the bullying have an impact, you painted an emotional image, and this makes your answer stand out. I really love your answer to the follow-up question. It was not just a classic answer to just like, do you think it's a appropriate punishment? No, yes. It showed a lot of thought, it showed a lot of maturity. Everyone's gonna talk. Everyone's gonna be saying something in the 8 minutes. Just saying something is not enough. It's saying it in the perfect way. It's exactly like everyone can dance. But to call yourself a professional dancer, you need to dance in a very specific way, in a very specific level. Okay, now move to the next question. But maybe let's give it to 5 minute feedback for
Yeah,
that.
I'll try to keep it really short. So again, like you did really great with the summary and giving the structure. You actually did better with the summary in those questions, so great job. And then you also made it personal though. When you were telling me stuff about your cat, like that's exactly what makes you personal. Why that's important, they always tell you, there's sometimes they have rubric and stuff, but at the end of the day, the big vibe question they're asking is, do I want this person to be my colleague? Because that's what they're doing, right? They're assessing a future colleague. So when you have those personal things, that really adds. So good job with that. Again, good job with showing empathy, because you were detailed in about like how your friend might feel. So because you went into that detail, that really shows me that you actually do have empathy. And then you gave details about your plan. You talked about that balance between, you can reach out to your friend for help, but also like not causing undue harm. That was really great. You talked about both outcomes, which was really good. And, a lot of students would miss that. So, and then importantly, this was also like I was really hoping you'd mention, and you did. You talked about you would check if the cat was harmed in any way, because if they were lost and that kind of stuff. So that was a really quick way. So good job mentioning that. You talked about your own emotional capacity to have empathy and compassion. So great job. When you talk about breaking bad news, you mentioned that you would acknowledge that you are fully responsible, and that was really great. But I can't remember if you explicitly said you would say sorry. So just make sure to take some time to actually say sorry. You might have, I just didn't catch it, so I made a note. And then great job connecting it to medicine. And you also did a really great job with the follow-up. The point of follow-ups like this is just to make sure to see if you get shaken up, because that's not really a legitimate follow-up, right? Like, so these kind of follow-ups just to make sure you don't get shaken up. Really quickly, the rooms to improve. You always say when you go into a question that that's quite interesting. It's fine if it's not like the same interviewers watching all of them. That being said, it can be a double-edged sword. So this is the feedback I've heard told to students who say this is sometimes the interviewer's like, no, this question is not that interesting. So just be careful. And then
John,
so
sorry to interrupt you. I actually have the same feedback. I have a feedback where it said maybe instead of saying that's an excellent question, as in complimenting the interviewer for it, um, maybe say thank you very much for the question. Is also this is something like if someone's very arrogant, they might not like use like saying that's an excellent question. But yeah, you can say thank you for the question.
yeah. And then really quickly, when you start with explaining your approach to breaking bad news, you don't need to start with a really obviously bad example. So when you said like, I wouldn't obviously, if they just walk in, be like, oh my God, I lost your cat. Like you don't need to start with a really bad example because I expect you to be at a higher caliber. So, but then, your actual approach was really good. The only other thing I would add to the breaking bad news is mentioning that you would take time and space for them to digest the information you just told them. So being comfortable sitting in silence and just taking up that space, that can be really powerful. And then the other thing, this is also a general thing, you did it with other questions as well. When you ask for follow-up, you don't need to be so like you don't need to ask in a really long way. Like, do you have any follow-ups about how I would answer the question, how my approach would be, what I would do, and what my role, like you didn't have to list all those things. And I know that was your structure, but you don't have to do that when you're asking for follow-up.
Yeah. I'll open the floor to Shahid and Sakshi.
I think Fatima did a great job with the feedback. For the sake of time, I'll just say one thing here. I think you would want to involve the friend earlier on in the scenario. I think when you're working with a cat or a minor, you would want the parents informed as soon as you can. So talk to them earlier on, get their perspective, apologize, let them know what happened, and take the steps and work together with the owner of the cat was one thing I would say you can add in a question like that if something like that comes up.
I'm gonna agree. You did really, really good. I think you got in the groove for this one. And I agree with that. That was my only comment. It's just getting them involved a bit earlier in the discussion of this. 100% for a pet or a minor. But overall, you did really, really well. You showed empathy. I liked how you connected it to medicine because in this type of question, you always should. And there was a couple of things that you mentioned that were really interesting. You mentioned an outlet. I think it was called 312. I cannot remember.
211.
211.
311. Yeah, I really enjoyed. That was new information for me. I really enjoyed
Cool.
this.
I need to go again. I'll be back in 2 minutes.
Okay. Um, hmm. I can't give him feedback.
We can,
Okay.
I mean, like so we have it written down, so I guess that feedback could be shared in text format too. Like, I mean, mine's written down. So.
No, absolutely, absolutely. So if you guys can stay for the next session, that would be very, very helpful because if you guys can do this one and the next one, it will really. Let's continue. So, Fatma left some feedback for you in the chat, but also before that, I will give you some feedback myself as well. So for the muffin question, I really love how you were good at talking about your cat, and you said you love him so much because this shows exactly like you are marketing yourself, and that's a great way, easy way, quick way to market yourself very well. Now, um, how I think you should have divided this is you should have divided it as private search versus public search because there is a certain point in time where okay the cat is in danger. Now we are not trying to save face, we are trying to save the cat. So this is where you call friends, you call the owner, tell them, hey look, this is going on. We are in Canada, right? So if the cat's outside, that's a completely different story. So for example, assess like is there maybe a window open or a door open that okay now we are more worried. Or if everything is closed, then you know
Yep.
if you know it's inside the house, yeah.
I was actually going to bring that up, but I was like, oh, is that going to scare is that going to scare the friend, like the point I brought up? And two, do I have enough time to explore all of that? And I didn't. So I should have brought it up,
Yes.
but
Excellent. You know something. This is why you can never have a very good situational answer without gathering information properly. You can't because you can't give a mature, well-rounded answer to a vague question, right? So you should ask, Does the like Fatma said, does the cat have a tracker? Is the cat outside or is it inside? Maybe I can call friends to help me, right? Because you want to show, the Canmid rules. You want to show you are a collaborator, right? Um, what else is there? You could have talked about self-reflection. Self-reflection is very important at this point in this question because you made a big mistake. Cat to some people is a family member, right? So you kind of killed a family member, and how much self-reflection this will require on your end, right? Understanding the seriousness of responsibility, understanding the consequences of not taking care of something you were accountable for. Now, next time you reflect when you take responsibility. Talking about medicine, how in medicine a slight mistake could lead to a death, how a slight mistake could lead to someone have long complications in the hospital, right? So self-reflection could have been a very strong point that you could have touched more on. Yeah, that's mainly it. We move to the last question. Sakashi, do you wanna? I think we might need to skip question 3 just for the time.
Yep.
Absolutely. So what I have is that your introduction was great. Great summary, summarizing the question. Great signposting. You did talk about the history, personal experience, and um, your thoughts and ideas on building that relationship. And you great job bringing up TRC, calls to action, personal experience in there. You had a great summary, great follow up. Okay. I really liked how you focused on the first piece was the acknowledgement, really taking that second to acknowledge what happened, and that was hard on them. And the second piece was you having concrete actions on how you can fix it. Okay. Now, one thing, if you wanted, you could work on was adding more empathy. Whatever happened was hard. Just say, I know I learned this from map back in the day. I can only imagine what happened. It must be so hard. So really taking 10 seconds, 20 seconds, if you had to show more empathy in a sensitive situation like this, would be something I would do. Okay. And then for the second part, where you had concrete steps, I really liked that you wanted to bring in changes regarding cultural safety, and you talked about building relationships and pathway for Indigenous students. Those were great ideas. If you wanted to add more stuff in there, use words like Indigenous-led initiatives. You want to collaborate with Indigenous peoples, but you also want them to be on the table. You want to give them seat at the table where they are the primary decision makers, while you are providing that support and letting them lead in that decision making. Okay, so Indigenous led relationships, that's a keyword that will definitely be good in a scenario like that. And then the second keyword is reciprocal, mutually beneficial relationship, right? And that's what College of Medicine focuses a lot on. We have to make sure that they are respected, but then they also have to be beneficial to other communities, so no other community feels like they're isolated or ignored. So mutually beneficial relationships would be something I would use, as opposed to using just relationships. And then you had a personal story in there that was excellent, and you ended the prompt very well. And you had a great knowledge on the topic. It's a sensitive topic, but you have done your reading and research on that, and I could see that through your answer.
Cool. Appreciate it. Thank you.
I'll open the floor to Shahid and Fatma, but yeah, let's be quick. Yeah.
So do you want to go first, because then I will cut myself down for you some time.
Yeah, so for this one, also really, really good. I agree with Sasha. You showed that you read up on the topic, pretty well. You talked about calls of action, TRC. The one thing that I would actually just elaborate on, at least from my point of view, is you talked about I would mention Indigenous-led initiatives in medicine. So, for example, a lot of schools right now are involving elders in specific talks when it comes to Indigenous patients. So, if you're having Indigenous patient come into your clinic, you would also invite an elder that would know more about their culture, their practices, to actually join in and know how to lead their care. I think that was the only thing that I would comment on, just to strengthen your answer and personal connection to it.
Awesome.
I
Thanks.
was just also sorry, I keep interrupting you. So I'm
No,
just
you're
gonna
good.
jump in. I'll jump in and also add a point here. So, for indigenous questions, it's so important. One thing that they always hate when you are answering indigenous question is tokenism or performative advocacy, right? So it's so important that you back up your points with real actions you took. If you read any books about the issue, mention that. If you took any courses, if you participated in any programs, if you volunteered anywhere, those are things to mention because those are hard evidence, right? And the understanding that one thing that I always mention in any indigenous question I'm answering is the fact that we are reaping the benefits of the injustice that happened to the indigenous people, right? We are living a good life, because of the injustices that happened to the indigenous people. And as someone who's in this land, I have a responsibility to correct those injustices, right? And to work towards them. And I agree with 100% with Sakashi on the point that nobody likes to be the the hand that is asking. If you say I want to help you, I want to help you, I want to help you, that does not sound good. If you say I want to work with you, I want to work together, as in equals, that would be a better way to speak about it, right? And I 100% agree. You need to show you are knowledgeable on the topic. Avoid general statements. In residential schools were bad. We all know that. No need to say that, right? Try to aim for something specific, such as saying the last residential school closed in Saskatchewan in 1997. This shows you understand. This shows right? Or you say you caught the what was the name of the report? In plain sight. You caught the in plain sight. You say as in the plain sight that the percentage of the indigenous teenagers who kill themselves is like 4 times the national average, right? So you talk about those things. It shows you care. Yeah, and I will leave some time for Fatima as well.
Okay. I'll try not to repeat anything everyone said, but like heavily like agree with literally every single thing that's been said. Um, the only additional things I'll add is in the like things you did really well. When you talked about being an ally, this is so important. You talked about it being an ally on a personal and a systemic level. Great job. So people sometimes miss one or the other, so great job with that. And then really important, you mentioned like you said no, not one size fits all, and then you did a really great job of talking about like it might have to do with like intergenerational trauma. It might have to do with like whatever medical example you gave and stuff. The only thing I would add is add a little bit more like an additional sentence talking about like individualized and personalized medicine, right? Like so you were getting to that point, but maybe having a more refined sentence talking about that, like how someone's identity is not the whole picture, and that's not always why they're coming into your clinic for, and that will apply to other communities as well. But that's a huge point that's emphasized in medical school. Okay, and then here's where it's gonna get a little bit tough, okay? And I hope you can take this because you're obviously done a really great job, and as my peers have mentioned, like you clearly have a really, really good knowledge of the subject, so that's really great. So when you started, you said the history of the indigenous peoples we have here in Canada. Okay. That sentence did not fit right.
I knew someone was gonna say that.
Yeah.
As soon as I said, I'm like, uh-oh, yeah.
You did a better job when you reframed it a couple sentences later, but
Yeah.
I just like that was like what you were coming off with. So I was like, oh.
Yeah.
And then so an additional thing you could talk about, this is what I've heard this emphasis a lot since I got into medical school. They talk about how in the truth and reconciliation is truth before reconciliation. So again, how actually was talking about spending that time with empathy, also spend that time with the truth. Like I need to it's not just, and again, what Abdul was saying, like don't just say residential schools. When you say a statement like that, like it's about truth before reconciliation, then you can, when you get those examples, they hold a little bit more weight. And then oh yeah, go ahead.
No, go. You finish, and I'll ask the question. But
okay, and then going back to Abdul was like kind of hinting to this too. When you talked about Indigenous peers coming through that other pipeline, I didn't like how you answer that because you were talking about like I would be supporting them with the curriculum, and that kind of assumes that they might be a lower caliber student, and never assume that. So instead, talk about like if you want to talk about that program, talk about how Unfortunately, some students will assume that they're getting a handout, and I would argue against that. But I wouldn't say that's the angle to take. Sometimes the question actually asks you about that, and then you have to make that argument. But I would just talk about how obviously I will have Indigenous peers and patients, and I need to make sure my workplace environment, my educational environment is acceptable. Like just reiterate those points, but just say for my peers and colleagues.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry to interrupt you for a second here. So let's end the recording here. Okay. And